All right, today we are diving into the brain science behind one of the most powerful tools a teacher has, prior knowledge. We're going to see how tapping into what our students already know can just completely supercharge their learning. But, and this is a big but, we're also going to uncover a crucial twist in the research, how that exact same knowledge can become an invisible wall, actively fighting against our teaching if we're not super careful.
Because that really is the question at the heart of it all today. What if the biggest barrier we face isn't a lack of knowledge, but a flawed knowledge? What if it's not what students don't know, but what they think they already know? Let's get into the research and really unpack this.
So, first up, let's look at the evidence for why this is such a big deal in the first place. We need to understand why activating prior knowledge works so well. You'll often hear this called the priming effect.
A fantastic study from just last year by Kufi really drives this home. The core finding was simple but powerful. When you activate a student's background knowledge, what researchers call their content schema, before they start writing, the quality of their essays goes through the roof. Now, we've got to be honest about the limitation here. It's a pretty small sample size, only 14 students, but the results were so incredibly clear, so statistically significant, that it still earns a high impact score of 4 out of 5. It just shows the principle in action so well.
And this is what I'm talking about. Look at these numbers, they're just wild. The way they ran the study was simple. Students wrote an essay. Then they did some activities to build up their schema. Things like reading and discussing the topic. Then they wrote a second essay. And wow, the average score for the essay content more than doubled. It jumped from a 4.57 to an 11.14. And that p-value of 0.000, that basically means there's almost zero chance this happened by accident. This isn't just a small bump. It's a massive, undeniable leap in performance.
And this quote right here, this tells the human story behind those stats. It wasn't just about getting a better grade. It was about the struggle, the confidence. You see that a huge majority of students, nearly 93%, felt that the first essay was harder, and they knew why. They pointed right to their lack of background knowledge. That intervention, that little bit of schema activation, it gave them the foundation they needed to feel confident and succeed.
So you might be thinking, okay, great, case closed. Activating prior knowledge is the silver bullet we've all been looking for. Well, hold on. The research tells a much more complicated and, honestly, a much more interesting story. This is where we get to the warning signs.
So let's ask that question directly. Is activating prior knowledge always a good thing, right? Well, not exactly. And this is where things get really tricky for us in the classroom, because that same prior knowledge can be a very well-disguised trap.
A brand new paper this year from Keith Tauber is an absolute must-read on this. He points out that students are great at overgeneralizing simple rules. And when they do that, they can create these really stubborn, flawed mental models that literally block them from learning more complex ideas. His big example is something he calls the octet framework in chemistry class. This insight is so fundamental to good teaching that it gets a 5 out of 5 on the impact score. It's critical stuff.
So what exactly is this octet framework? It's a super common misconception where students start to think of atoms as little characters that have a desire or a need to get a full outer shell of 8 electrons. It's a simple, catchy story. And in their minds, this little story becomes the only reason chemical reactions happen. It makes sense to them, but it's just not scientifically accurate. And believe me, it is incredibly difficult to get them to let go of that idea once it's taken root.
And you can hear just how deep this flawed model goes in the way students talk. This quote from the research is so perfect. Listen to the words they use. Atoms are aiming for something. They don't want to react. That's not the language of science. That's the language of a storybook. When you hear students using language like this, treating atoms like people, it's a huge flashing red flag that a powerful misconception is in play. Their prior knowledge isn't a bridge, it's become a barrier.
Okay, so we've got a real conflict here. We know activating knowledge is incredibly powerful, but we also know it can accidentally lock in bad ideas. So how do we get all the benefits without the serious drawbacks? Well, our third study points us toward a practical solution, what I'm calling the diagnostic toolkit.
A really important literature review by Kathy Joan Daniel gives us the tools we need. The core finding is that something called advanced organizers create ideational scaffolding. That sounds a bit academic, I know, but think of it like this. It's like giving students a mental blueprint. It's a structure that helps them see exactly how the stuff they already know connects to the new information you're about to teach. It helps them get their thoughts in order.
And what are these magic tools? You already know them.
We're talking about things like KWL charts, concept maps, or even just a well-structured class discussion. But here's the absolute key, the idea that ties all of this research together. These aren't just tools to activate knowledge, they're tools to make student thinking visible. They let you peek inside their heads and see not just what they know, but how they've organized it. And that changes everything.
Okay, so we've looked at 3 different pieces of the puzzle from 3 different angles. Now it's time to put them all together. Let's see where the research is all saying the same thing, and more importantly, where the real tension lies for us as teachers.
So let's do a quick recap. CUFI's experiment proves that activating schema gives you this huge boost in student performance. Tabor's synthesis comes in with a critical warning that faulty schema can slam the brakes on learning. And finally, Daniel's review gives us the tools, the advanced organizers, that can help us structure that schema correctly. You can start to see how these 3 seemingly different ideas are actually telling one complete story.
And this slide right here, this is the heart of it all. So what does everyone agree on? It's simple. Activating students' existing knowledge isn't just a nice-to-have, it's a powerful and necessary part of effective teaching. Period. But here's the tension, the big but. If we just blindly activate that knowledge without first checking to see if it's correct, we run the massive risk of strengthening the very misconceptions, like that octet framework, that we're trying to fix. You could accidentally be pouring concrete on a faulty foundation. So, how do we solve this? How do we navigate that tension? Well, that brings us to the expert's playbook. We have to move past the simple idea of activate, then teach. We need a smarter, more sophisticated approach.
And here it is. The new model is simply diagnose, then activate. It's a 4-step process. First, you surface their thinking. You use those advanced organizers to make it visible. Second, you diagnose it. You put on your detective hat and you actively hunt for those flawed mental models. Third, you address the misconceptions. You call them out directly and explicitly. And then, and only then, do you move to step 4. You activate their now corrected prior knowledge, knowing you're building on solid ground.
Okay, theory is great, but let's make this real. What does this actually look like on a rainy Tuesday morning in your classroom? Here's a simple 3-step action plan you can use this week.
Step 1. Run a diagnostic primer. So before you start your next topic, don't just jump in. Use a KWL chart or even just a simple prompt like, tell me everything you know about. But here's the key. You're not just collecting facts. You are listening for the logic they're using. You're listening for those little stories they tell themselves. Think of this as your data collection phase. Okay, step 2. Name the misconception. If your diagnostic primer uncovers a common mistake, don't just ignore it. You have to address it, head-on, with the whole class. And use framing like this. You know, a really common way to think about this is X, but that can actually be a trap because of Y. When you name it and explain why it's so tempting, you take away its power. You're showing them the flaw in the logic, not just telling them they're wrong. And finally, step 3. Build a visual bridge. Okay, so you've addressed the misconception. The faulty foundation is gone. Now you have to help them rebuild. And a concept map is an amazing tool for this. It lets you visually show them the right connections. You are literally drawing them a map of how to build a better, more accurate mental model that links their solid knowledge to the new ideas. So, as you sit down to work on your next lesson, I just want you to ask yourself this one question. Is this plan designed to build new knowledge, or could it just maybe be accidentally reinforcing a hidden barrier? By learning to diagnose before you activate, you can make sure you are always building on solid ground. If you found this research breakdown helpful, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button for more explainers just like this. Thanks for watching.